When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadabji, your podcast host, a practicing social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 82, A Mother Learning to Effectively Parent Children with Mental Health and Addiction Challenges. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our courageous and daring guest, Maureen Towns. Maureen is also the mother of our recent guest, Allie Towns, and with her permission, her mother has come on board today to share and tell life and impact from her own perspective. Maureen is the founder and owner of Maureen Towns Consulting, a consulting company designed to help families struggling to care for their loved ones with mental health and addictions issues. Her work with families inspires them to rediscover themselves within chaotic and challenging situations. Maureen published her first book, Broken Open, in 2021. Maureen holds a Bachelor of Science in Nursing and a Master of Arts degree. She is a family consultant with over 25 years of nursing experience in both public and private healthcare across Canada. Her own family's struggles with mental illness and addiction transformed her approach to communication, boundary setting, and advocacy, and ultimately led to positive relationships and freedom. Fueled by the lasting positive impact to the many families she's already helped, Maureen's mission now is to bring that wholeness, healing, and freedom to families across the world. Hello, Maureen. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast. Hello, welcome.
Thanks so much, Salima. It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's so awesome. Maureen, I am so pumped for this opportunity to have you as a guest on the show, the opportunity to previously speak with your daughter, and now you showing up with your willingness to be here today to tell your own story. I have nothing just but gratitude for you. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for giving me the opportunity. I'm so proud of Allie and really appreciate that she was on your podcast as well.
Amazing. You know, not just Allie, yourself, all of the guests so far, each person, each individual has allowed me to tap into their vulnerability and draw from their strength and insight. And there's so much inspiration that I find has a ripple effect in this space. So I hope that together we can take a stance together today to work on that mission to help break barriers of mental stigma. What do you say? Are you in?
I'm totally in.
I love it. Awesome. Okay, so Maureen, in case you're still wondering, this podcast is all about bringing forward untold stories that people go through, whether directly about a mental health struggle or something else. And we know that no matter the story, there is impact on one's own mental health in some way, which remains tucked away. And this platform serves in a way to break the barriers of mental stigma that have been conditioned in our society. So today, my hopeful mission is for both of us to encourage people to share and tell what individuals typically have reservation to express.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I continue to bring forward a trend, and it's called the mental beauty rethink. Maureen, tell me, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear that phrase, the mental beauty rethink?
Well, I love the phrase, and what comes to mind is the first time that I was really challenged to rethink
Mm-hmm.
what I viewed as a mental health challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And it was during a program that I took through a family connections program here in Calgary. And it was meant for families or parents of children with borderline personality disorder. And
Mm-hmm.
I'd always really felt the heaviness of that diagnosis and the heaviness of my own experience with my kids with that diagnosis. And
Mm-hmm.
when I went to this program, the facilitator talked about the beauty and the gifts of borderline personality disorder and
Mm.
really reframed the whole concept for me. And one of the things that she said was that, without people who feel intensely, which is
Mm-hmm.
something that borderline personality disordered people do,
Right.
without people who feel intensely, we wouldn't have the arts, we wouldn't have poetry, we wouldn't have music, we wouldn't have a lot of the beauty that connects us as human beings. And that really helped me to see
Mm-hmm.
the beauty in everyone, no matter whether there's a diagnosis or a challenge, everyone's experience and everyone's humanity and everyone's journey just carries so much beauty. And we're all of us experiencing mental health challenges at one time or another. And it was beautiful to rethink how I saw that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's beautiful that you're able to make that connection. It's a really nice remembering with a very personal sharing because it's really something that got you to rethink. And I guess this phrase is like a reminder of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the mental beauty rethink. And it sounds like from how you've expressed it, it's like this idea of like we all have a little bit of something,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to be unique how it shows up for each of us.
Yes.
Hmm. And so I love hearing people share with me what comes up for them because I often find I don't hear the same thing twice.
I bet. And I really love the phrase because I think it really speaks to the mission that you're on, helping people to rethink mental health and see the beauty in it.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about the stigma and eradicating the stigma around mental health. And
Mm-hmm.
it's such a noble
Mm-hmm.
quest, I think, that you're on. And I commend you for it. It's amazing.
Oh, lovely. No, I really appreciate this sharing. It's so insightful. So, Maureen,
Yes.
let's get down to business and crack that story open.
Okay. Okay.
Awesome. I love that you're all enthusiastic with me.
Mhm.
Okay, so then that first question, give us the newspaper headline, Maureen, of how you would title your untold story. How would it read?
Oh, I think I would title it We See Others as We Are, Not as They Are.
Could you say that once more, please?
Sure. We see others as we are, not as they are.
We see others as we are, not as they are.
Yeah.
So, what does this title spark for you?
Well, it really comes down to everybody filters every experience that we have, like in the present day, through the lens of our past, right? Meaning that we project our past emotions and experiences onto others in our present day.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that that shows up is that when something is happening that reminds me of something I've seen before, I then project that past experience onto what's happening in the present, whether or not it deserves it or merits it. And that's where
Mm-hmm.
you see people, overreacting or
Mm-hmm.
acting out. And in my own experience, it's where I found myself, acting out of fear
Mm-hmm.
rather than being present to what was actually going on. It was a fear of an anticipated future for my kids rather than being present and curious as to who they were and what they were experiencing. Right? It led to all kinds of denial, triggered overreactions, and a fierce attempt to control what was going on in my home. So that's the title.
Wow, there's so much meaning there, and I think that a title that each person can recite to themselves and make their own connection with these words. Okay, well, thank you for sharing that title.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah. Okay, well then let's get that untold story going. Give us the who, what, when, where. I want to know all of the details.
Okay, well, in a nutshell, I would say that my story is it really involves my 4 children.
Okay.
I had 4 kids in a 6-year span, so they're very close together. And it was during their teen years: Sam, Ben, Sydney, and Allie. So 2 boys and 2 girls. And really, the story is about my own recovery from codependence and a codependent parenting style, and learning to parent more effectively that led to a sense of real freedom for me on the backdrop of their addiction and mental health challenges. The intensity of that was mainly between 2011 and 2016, but still carries into the present.
Sure.
And all of that was happening here in Calgary, Alberta.
Okay. And so 4 children in 6 years, close in age, all experiencing some sort of mental health impact, and you going through your own recovery. What were the particular challenges that your children were facing?
Well, it started with our second son and us noticing that he was changing. We just noticed in his last year of high school that he seemed different than he was before. He was a little bit apathetic. His attendance was very, very poor. To our faces, he was very compliant, but then would go off and do whatever he wanted. And he was losing weight rapidly and seemed very unmotivated. And that was not like him. He's always a really active and engaged kid. And it came to light that year, and that would have been in 2011, I believe, the spring of 2011, that we started to really suspect that he had some issues with drugs. And I say issues with drugs because I couldn't at that time use the word addict. I was quite terrified of that word and had a real preconceived notion of what an addict was. And putting that label onto my kids was just unthinkable to me. So I thought, okay, he's just using some drugs. But that fall, I would say the fall of 2011, it became quite clear that he was in trouble. He was really, really not doing well, not thriving. He ended up being homeless for a period of time, living on the street. And we then, staged an intervention and sent him off to treatment across the country, really not knowing anything about drugs or addiction or interventions or drug treatment. We did all this.
Right.
That was sort of the beginning of our journey that lasted about 5 years. And over time, we knew that Ben had an issue, and then suddenly Allie seems to be having an issue with self-harm.
Right.
The following summer, Sam came home from university and had a psychotic break that was drug-induced. Ben was out of treatment, relapsing, living on the street. Again, Sam was suicidal and attempting suicide quite effectively. And thus began, our journey of absolute frantic, fear-induced chaos in our home that went on for a few years.
And Ben is the first one we spoke about, right? That the one.
Yeah, Ben.
Right.
Yeah, Ben's the second son. Then Allie, my youngest, who was on your podcast, was self-harming. And then my oldest son started to experience issues. And then, and all the while, Sydney, my third child, is hiding out in her room, just isolating, just trying to stay away from it all. And, we were just really grateful at the time that she wasn't, quite frankly, trying to kill herself. And we're really not very available or tuned into the fact that she was also struggling with quite a bit of depression and maybe even some suicidality. But that didn't come to light for years. So at the time, we just thought it was 3 out of 4 kids really struggling.
So all of these things were happening one after the other within a 5-year span. What was it like to be at home with all of these different eruptions?
Chaotic, depressing, sad, discouraging. There were times I didn't want to go home. Like, honestly, I just wanted a break from it. It felt like every time I walked in the door, there was another crisis. Every
Mm-hmm.
time my phone rang, there was another crisis. And it was almost exactly like that.
Were you feeling like you were walking on eggshells? Like if you were feeling like anytime the phone rings, you're thinking it's going to be a crisis. How did you function?
Not well.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't sleep very well.
Mm-hmm.
Laid awake a lot. Felt like a real failure as a parent. Was really identified as a problem solver. I mean, I was a nurse and worked in healthcare
Mm-hmm.
and really, really relished the effect I could have. I used to call it my cape and boots. I was used to swooping into a situation or chaos and crisis and, zip, zap, zoop, full
Right.
control. I got this and having a great effect. And people would say, "Thank you, nurse." And I'd say, "You're welcome, ma'am." And,
Mm-hmm.
fly off into the sunset. And so I was very, very agitated and frustrated that wouldn't work with my own kids. I kept trying and trying and trying to manage and control and save and rescue and direct and tell. And it just didn't work. And I got more and more fatigued and tired and tired and tired until I was completely, completely depleted. I remember being at one point, a couple of years into it, absolutely numb and immobilized and it felt like my legs were made of cement. When
Mm-hmm.
Sam had his psychotic break and was hospitalized, I remember I wanted to just lay down on the floor in the hospital hallway and just go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was just done. I couldn't function. I couldn't make decisions.
Right.
I just was not doing well at all. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to look after myself and I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
that I needed it. I didn't even know where to find it.
So not even knowing that you needed help, like so you didn't even know what to do, what help to ask for, where to get it. So how did you manage? I mean, you're telling me things like you desperately wanted a break. I imagine you didn't get a break, like that break never came, and indicating that you just wanted to lie on the hospital floor like you were just done.
Mm-hmm.
What did you do?
Well, I think what I did is I remember I did actually take a few days and I flew to Ontario to visit my family and I wasn't healthy at all. I mean, I landed, I had trouble packing my bag.
Mm-hmm.
I was just that spent. I couldn't just figure anything out. And I remember landing and my brother handing me a glass of wine. And as I drank it, he said I looked like I was melting, into the
Mm-hmm.
chair. Like I was
Mm-hmm.
so tired. And a week break was great. And I'm grateful for it. Really, what I needed was a few years. Like it had been years of chaos, and
Yeah.
a week isn't going to do it.
Yeah.
And I think what it led to is more and more erratic parenting. So, I'd have a burst of energy in which I would try to case manage my kids because that's what I thought I could do. I can do this for others. Why can't I do it for my kids? And then I would go into complete shutdown and fatigue and indifference. So how I would present then, I think, to my kids would be, loud and, controlling and maybe even a little bit aggressive and
Right. So it's kind of like one extreme and then going to another extreme.
yeah, a real pendulum swing, and I can't imagine that would have been very fun or easy to live with either. So
Mm-hmm.
that's, I think, where I got to. Just we've all had those days when you're not looking after yourself and you're a little bit tired, and someone says something to you and it affects you deeply, and you snap. It was kind of like that times a thousand for me, all the time, just really reactive.
Mm-hmm. So is that how you showed up the whole time, or were there pockets of time that would be the case?
I would say I was like that for about 2 years, quite frankly. Two really rough years, 2011 to 2013. And it was the fall of 2013 that we
Mm-hmm.
finally, someone pointed us in the direction of a family treatment center that I would say really was the turning point for us. So in 2013, we offered this treatment center called Alberta Adolescent Recovery Center to Ben. We knew that Ben had an addiction problem. We suspected Sam did too, but we weren't sure.
Right.
So we offered it to Ben. you're either out on your own or you can go here. This is what we'd like to see you do. And it was a family treatment center.
Right.
And they mandated that the entire family participate in the treatment.
Right.
And had they not done that, there's no way that I would have voluntarily participated in treatment because I didn't think I had, quote unquote, the problem. I thought it was the kids. And so without that, I don't know where I'd be, honestly. It really jump started, I would say, my own recovery and my own transition and learning how to understand addiction, first of all, understand the family dynamic, understand my role in the chaos in our home, and learn like what is detachment with love? How do I let go? What is my role as a parent? If it's not a case manager, what is it? And how do I break that codependent cycle that I, really come by quite honestly, growing up in a fairly dysfunctional home.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say that it was 2013 that things started to change for me.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, before we start talking about some of the changes, you mentioned you started to learn about addiction and how to be in this role and understanding the family dynamics and the attachments and learning about so many areas that you were unaware of. Then you said that you started to recognize that, you weren't a case manager, you were a parent,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So what did that look like for you, first of all?
Well, it looked like I really did believe
Mm-hmm.
that I knew what my kids should do. And I
Mm.
really did believe that I knew best. And no one knew the history like me. And no one understood them like I did. And no one was as invested as in their recovery as me. And coming from that perspective that I need to be involved here.
Mm-hmm.
This is very much a case manager perspective.
Mm-hmm.
No, I gotta be directing the orchestra kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
If everyone just does what I say, everything will work out great.
Right.
Even the treatment center. Like I remember, we put the kids in treatment. They're no longer my problem. They're being managed by the treatment center. What they're doing is none of my business. But I don't know how to let it go. I don't know what to do with myself. I don't know how to look after me. I'm so used to my preoccupation with how everybody else is doing that when I'm relieved of that, I don't know what to do with myself. And so I found myself, driving by the treatment center and trying to see what was going on. And
oh my goodness, Maureen.
yeah, it's a pretty big heads up that you got a problem, and I remember one of the enemies saying that. And I thought, honestly, the story that I had for myself was I'm a good mom.
Right.
I care. And that's why I'm driving by and trying to see them.
Mm-hmm. So you're rationalizing it.
Yeah, we can reframe everything into a positive, right? And
Yes.
that's what I was doing. And I remember sharing it one night in group therapy that I had done this, a little bit boasty, like, look how
Great I am.
involved I'm trying to be.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm so involved. I'm one step ahead.
Yes, I'm going to win the gold star, the parenting gold star,
Right.
And I remember one of the facilitators of the group that night said, and I trusted her and she knew me well. So this statement sounds really harsh, but it coming from her to me landed exactly right. She said, "Wow, Maureen, you really need to get a life." And
Are you serious? That's what she said?
she did, but it was perfect because it shocked me a little bit. And she's right. But I didn't know how to get a life. I didn't know what a life was for me outside my preoccupation with my kids. It had been so
Right.
long. Plus, like I say, this is the gist of codependence. Unusually and unhealthily preoccupied with how other people are doing at the expense of learning how to look after my own health. And that's exactly what I was exhibiting. And so this was the beginning of me sort of, getting a proverbial slap upside the head and realizing that I really do need to get a life. I wonder what that would look like if I stopped obsessing about my kids, if I trusted that other people could care for them and maybe even were more appropriate to care for them than I was. And so that was
the big wake up call, huh?
yeah, it was one of the very beginning, one of the first moments of grace, I would say, that I had.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then if that's what a case manager looked like, and then you started to learn you don't need to case manage, what did your life start to look like?
Oh my gosh, it started to look like my job is to love them
Mm-hmm.
and to have a healthy relationship with them, which is one in which I can communicate and express my love for them unconditionally,
Mm-hmm.
and to believe in them and to cheer them on, and to tell them that I'm here to support them. I'm
Mm-hmm.
here to support them and cheer them on. And that's it. I don't need to manage them. I don't need to control them. I don't need to nag them. I don't need to tell them what to do. I don't even need to tell them that I have an idea of what maybe they should be doing, because they know. They know that I've got an opinion about everything, and they're welcome to ask if they want it, but I don't need to tell them. It's their life. And so, I started to learn how to repair the relationship and be trustworthy
Mm-hmm.
and empathize and learn how to validate them and their
Mm-hmm.
experience without interfering in it.
Mm-hmm.
I learned to develop boundaries, which made me healthier, which made our relationship healthier. And it wasn't just a sequential thing. I mean, it was little bit by bit, experience after experience, episode after episode,
Right.
with them, trial and
Mm-hmm.
error.
You were okay with the trial and error now,
Yeah.
right? By
Yeah.
that point, trial and error was something you could entertain. But
Yeah.
I have a hunch that when you were in case manager mode, trial and error was not a thing for you.
It was frantic and fear driven then.
Right.
And
Right.
in the recovery process, it was intentional and responsive instead of reactive. It
Mm-hmm.
was a completely different way of coming at it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so those are some real notable differences.
Mm-hmm.
That must have really taken some of the load off of you.
It, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. It really did take a load off. I mean, what a relief. I remember one night, this was another turning point for me. And it was a night when the boys were in recovery at ARC, and we were having a celebration of some sort, some milestone that they had reached. And Allie didn't want to participate. She wasn't feeling well and she wanted to
Mm-hmm.
stay home. And when we got home that night, Allie had called the kids' helpline of some description, and the police were there. And they're inside talking to Allie, and they're interviewing her and I separately. And she's feeling like self-harming, and I'm pretty angry at this point. I'm like, seriously, like,
Mm-hmm.
really,
Mm-hmm.
now you got to do this now? Like, that's really how I
Right.
felt. And
Like annoyed, irritated after the
very,
long
yeah,
day and all of the different things that you've been contending with.
yeah. And like, can we not catch a break? Can we not have a celebration without another crisis?
Right.
And so they determined that Allie needed to go to the hospital. And so, sure enough, they throw her in the car and they start driving her to the hospital. And I'm meant to follow her. I get in my car and I'm driving up to the hospital to once again offer an unbelievable family history to some nurse who's going to
Right.
go, "Are you serious? Tell me again." And I felt re-traumatized every time I had to go through this family history.
Sure. Sure.
And I phoned a friend who knows how to put my head back on straight, and
Right.
I talked to her and I said, "This is what I'm doing, and I'm angry." And she said to me, "Maureen, for once, why don't you let go of trying to manage everything and let the hospital assess her and make a decision on their own? Don't try and be in charge. You don't have to be. They got this. They're used to this. This is their job, and it's not your job anymore." And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess you're right. I don't have to go up there and try and coerce the staff into doing what I think needs to be done. I'm going to let go of that, and I'm going to it's not in my hands anymore. And that was a really good starting point for me in that letting go of that case managing process. I don't need to manage this situation. Allie was alone. She felt vulnerable. She made a good phone call. She's being assessed by professionals. Stay out of it. Offer the history and just be the parent. How about that, Maureen? Like, try not to be the healthcare professional who manages everything. And it was a relief. So when you say it was a relief, that story comes to mind of, I think my shoulders came down about 3 inches, and I took a deep breath
Mm.
and thought,
Right.
yeah, I'm going to let go and just let professionals do their job and
Mm-hmm.
just be the mom.
And do you ever revisit that moment when you are feeling uptight or intense about anything else in life since then? Like remembering that idea of letting go if you find yourself creeping back into that pattern?
Yeah, for sure I do. I mean, I've gotten pretty good at it now. I'm
Mhm,
pretty used to my role and the
mhm,
boundaries around it, but
mhm.
I still do have to remind myself that,
Sure.
I don't know everything. I don't
Mhm,
know the best way. I don't know the best solution. There's a million ways to get
mhm,
from A to B.
mhm.
Everybody has their own way of doing it.
Right.
Stay out of it and let everybody have their journey. Like and mind your own business. Have yours, you can't look after yourself
Yeah.
if you're looking after everybody else all the time. So just how about solve your own problems, Maureen, and let let other people work through their own thing. And it's been really helpful too in letting my kids especially deal with the consequences of what they're doing. I don't have to manage it. They get to manage it. Allow people to grow. Allow people to have the space to make mistakes and learn from it, and don't stay out of it. And the more I stay out of it, the healthier they seem to be, and the better my relationship with them seems to be.
Mm. Yeah, it sounds like you really came to terms with accepting that I do have a lot of knowledge and I do have a lot to offer and I do have a lot of insight. And of course, I'm going to have mom opinions and everything else. And at the same time, I'm going to take a step back and let my children come to me as they need to. But the way I show up needs to be consistent. That's the way I want to show up, consistent, showing unconditional love, showing that support, being able to cheer them regardless of what choices that they're making.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like that really became clear to you.
It did. And what I've noticed in that process is that when
Mhm,
I'm really inclined to tell, direct, interfere,
mhm.
underneath that, if I stop and think, is fear. So it's always a fear driven impulse in me
Yes.
that wants to manage and control, right?
Right.
And so noticing that, and I don't know about you, but I've never made really good moves when they're fear driven.
Never. Not for me either. Like,
No, it
and I
never
can
goes
say
well.
so for many of the people that I've worked with. And I'm like, I
Yeah,
usually say, that's the thing you got to ask yourself. Is this a fear thing going on right now for me? Because it usually bites me in the butt, right? Like every single time.
absolutely. Poor
Right.
decisions,
Yes.
damage relationships.
Yeah, tunnel vision,
Um,
not actually looking at all the possibilities or the actual reality of those choice points and the consequences that are attached to that. Yeah, absolutely. I've been there.
Yeah, so when I'm, inclined to manage and control people, I notice that underneath that is a fear drive, and and that's just good information for me to stop
It is. So it's like that
and
urge.
notice the fear.
You're noticing the urge and you give it a label. You're like, oh, that's that fear thing, I think.
Right. Okay, so there's some fear. What is my fear? And
Then
manage
you can
it.
get curious about it. But that's your process now because you're noticing, because it's in your awareness. Now you're comfortable to get curious.
Yeah, and then I start to notice this is getting a little bit deeper, but then I notice, so where's the fear coming from? Is it actually based in what's happening right now? Is it a rational fear? Or is it a historical fear because it reminds me of an experience that I had in my family of origin somewhere?
Right.
So, how balanced is my
Yes.
emotional reaction at this point? That
Mhm.
filter that I talked about earlier,
Yeah.
right? We see others as we are, not as they are. Like,
Mhm.
and I get the chance to really dive into, okay, where am I coming from here?
Yeah.
What is this? Is this old? Is this new? Is this
Yeah.
reasonable? Or, is it worth expressing my fear? And I can say that to my kids. I have some fear around what you're
Right.
doing. And I say that not so that you change your behavior to relieve me of my fear, but so that you understand the connection that I have with you.
Yeah. And where you're coming from.
Yeah, and what you do has an effect on the people around you.
Mhm.
And yeah, and where I'm coming from. But never, never do I want them to feel like they need to manage my feelings. Those are mine to manage.
Great. That's a really great, solid life lesson that
Hmm.
is so hard to grapple with sometimes, but it sounds like you nailed it.
No, thanks. Still nailing it. Still nailing it.
That-
Every time it comes up, you have to re-nail it.
That's okay, but you've got what it takes to nail it. So that's the
Hmm.
most important part.
Yeah.
So, Maureen, when people come to see me for therapy, individuals are typically in one of three places when they do come. Some people are getting started where they're like, I hear therapy's a good thing to do. I want to
Mhm.
start this process. I don't really know what's supposed to unfold. Some people are in the middle where they're prompted to attend therapy as a result of something happening, and they're in the thick of things and really need some support navigating. And some people are looking back, whether it's that they're just trying to close certain chapters in their life, get some insight or closure, or perhaps they're wanting to move forward and work on themselves and self-discovery and personal growth. So for yourself, given the journey that you've been on with all of your children, growing up into adults, where would you say you are in the journey for yourself with everything you've shared today? Would you say that you are just getting started, in the middle, or looking back?
In the terms of my journey with my kids, I feel like I'm very much looking back,
Mm-hmm.
seeking insight, like I say, into why I behave the way I do. I'm always really curious about that and really interested in moving forward. So, my job now is to maintain a healthy relationship with my kids, no matter where they are
Mm-hmm.
and what they're doing. And that's it. And so, really, a lot of acceptance, right? Because they have their ups and downs. They're
Mm-hmm.
still figuring things out as they will be for the rest of their lives. And so, my job is to figure out, okay, so, if they're doing something that, I'm honestly at the point now where I don't think anything would really get me too down. But there were times in this journey where if they were using, I didn't want to be around them. It was too triggering for me. I had a hard time not interfering or trying to manage or being preoccupied.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a boundary around that. If you're using, don't come to my home. Or if you're coming to my home, don't use, that kind of a
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, now I really can accept them wherever they are and
Mm-hmm.
really love them in whatever phase of recovery or relapse they might be in. And I love spending time with them. I
Mm-hmm.
have trouble feeling connected to someone who's out of it
Mm-hmm.
on drugs, but that's about it.
Right.
But it doesn't feel traumatizing to me.
Yeah, and it sounds like establishing the firm and clear boundaries for yourself and for those around you allow you to stay in the position of looking back because there's that
Yeah.
clear separation for you and there's a lot of clarity for you.
There is. Yeah. I feel very lucky, honestly.
It
Yeah.
really does sound like it's been definitely the journey has had its ups and downs and roller coasters and twists and turns. But in that, not only have you learned so much about yourself, but you've really enmeshed yourself in the process with each of your children, and then also being able to take steps back and separate from that. So you kind of have been able to experience all angles,
hmm
and you're comfortable with your position now.
Yeah. It doesn't mean that I don't have lots of feelings. I
No,
mean,
of course, you still have feelings, but it sounds
oh,
like now
yeah.
you are able to regulate them and manage
Yeah.
them and address them and nurture them.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I can acknowledge that it always hurts to see your kids hurting, right?
Of
It's
course.
hard to see them struggle. I love them. They're part of me and I'm part of
Mm-hmm.
them. And it's difficult to see your kids go through difficulties. But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, I almost celebrate giving them the space to experience it. I think back on my own struggles and my own lessons learned. And if people had saved me or interfered or directed me, and I had not been allowed
Mm-hmm.
to struggle and grow
Mm-hmm.
the way that I have, I wouldn't be who I am. And so I want to offer that same opportunity
Mm-hmm.
to my four children who are all experiencing their own journey and their own struggles.
Right.
And I had to deal with the first thing I had to deal with to get to this place was my own fear that they might die and I might not live through that.
Right.
And so when I could come to terms with, and I remember people saying, you have to accept the fact that they might die. And I remember just railing, like just almost a physical freak out that how dare you? How
Mm-hmm.
dare you suggest that I need to accept the fact that my kid might die? Not in a million years will I ever accept that. It's unacceptable. It's
Mm-hmm.
not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Because what it sounded like people were saying is you need to become complacent and let it happen. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I will not sit by and let them deteriorate like that. At the same time, only through the experience of running up against them and their addiction, them and their mental health over and over and over, and feeling ineffective in that, did I start to recognize that I can't actually control it.
Right.
I can't, I've tried every which way and it doesn't work. I can't control it. I have no say. I have no say in how this goes. I have to accept that I don't get to manage the outcome of what goes on here. And when I could do that, then I could step back and say, okay, I'm going to allow them to have the journey that they're meant to have. Right. And I'm going to be over here cheerleading and loving them unconditionally. Right. And just letting them know that I love them to bits and I'm here for them if they need help with something.
Right. It's so transformative.
It was.
So Maureen, what I'm curious about, we've talked about this whole journey that you've been through, this untold story of yours, of the complete change in your parenting style, where you were, Madam Case Manager, to completely being able to find a way to let go and be that cheerleader to your children in full acceptance and full unconditional love. But during all of this, I'm curious about how your untold story has affected your mental health. I mean, you spoke about, I recall earlier in our conversation, you talked about how there was this moment or moments where you continued to feel that fatigue and really feel completely depleted and feeling numb, immobilized, and, being told you look like you're melting into a chair. And, a 1 week break was just it's like taking one deep breath in your world. Can you break it down a little more for me? And can we go a little deeper into what that impact was like for you?
Yeah. I mean, I gained a lot of weight during this period of time. I, looking for some dopamine, ate lots of bread and sugar to get through it. So of course I wasn't feeling
emotional eating.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I still do that, but I wasn't feeling well physically because of how I've been eating as well. What I really noticed was that I have a real trigger point around the word lazy. And that comes from my childhood, but I had a real fear of rest and wasn't very good at it. And I didn't understand what self-care meant, and I thought that self-care was about nails and hair. And I didn't have any clue how to look after myself, what that might look like, what that might feel like, how to slow down and how to rest. And your body will teach you, right? Your body will just stop working well. When I would say by 2014 to 2016, long road to recovery for me. Lots of sleep. Sleep and sleep and sleep and sleep, taking walks, learning to find joy again, learning what my own interests were. I just didn't even know. And I talk to parents now who express the same thing. They learn how to stop managing their kids and then they say, but I don't even know who I am. And I say, I get it. I didn't know who I was either. Right. Trying to find things that brought me joy again. Simple things like walking in the woods, looking at the sky, doing a puzzle, reading a book, connecting with people that I felt really actually connected with. The journey for me and my own mental health has been a lot of that, just rediscovering who I am and how to actually really and truly look after myself. Lots of therapy in there too. I shouldn't skip the therapy. Lots of therapy. I did talk therapy. I did EMDR therapy. And of course, I went at my own recovery like a bit of a project, like I do everything, and read lots of books and listened to lots of podcasts and just kept learning. So, but gently, learn to be gentle with myself, learn to accept parts of myself that I didn't even like very much. Yeah, and I would say that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I really feel like you went full circle by sharing not just the impacts but that process of recovery and what it looked like for you. And especially what you tied in at the end, the last thing you said, which was learning to be gentle with yourself and just accepting all parts of you.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite important to take the time to acknowledge that. That's huge.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is that as I've learned to accept myself, I've become way more accepting of others.
It's so
they're
true.
directly in proportion. You know, when I'm judgy of others, it's a good sign that I'm probably being hard on myself as well, and that I've got some work to do. You know, so that's what I've noticed about acceptance, self-acceptance.
Yes, it is a big message. And in fact, that's what I was going to ask you next is like, it's a great segue. What's your key message to the listeners of our show? What do you want them to know?
Oh man, I want them to know that I want them to know that they're not alone. If they're really if they're identifying with something that I've talked about in my story, you're not alone. And you don't need to do it alone. I thought I was very alone. I felt very alone until we found the treatment. So for 2 years, I felt very isolated and frightened. Yeah. So I just want people to know that they're not alone. And for those parents out there who think that they're terrible parents because, you know, they're doing all the things like setting boundaries and there's consequences for their kids and they've got rules and the kids aren't responding and they seem to be sliding downhill like ours were, that there's a good chance that you maybe don't have typical kids. And that's why the typical parenting isn't working and that it's not your fault. I felt like I laid awake countless nights feeling responsible for screwing up my kids. I had a role to play in the chaos in my home for sure, but I didn't create the problem.
Yeah, there's help out there. Perfect. Okay. So Maureen, I'm curious about what was that game-changing inspiration for you? Something that's close to you that reflects your untold story, like a quote or a book or a speaker or event, something that really was the start to your journey, taking that 180.
Something that I craved throughout my time that I didn't feel like I was getting. And when I finally did get it, you know, like I say, my shoulders came down about 3 inches and I could start to listen. It was validation. I just so desperately wanted someone to say to me on one of those many, many, many encounters with healthcare and giving a history. Wow, it sounds like you've been through a lot, Maureen. I can tell you're working really hard. You're a good parent, Maureen. I can tell you're giving it your all and you must be really tired. Like I just wanted someone to see that and voice it. I needed it so badly. And when I finally did start to hear that, when we were at ARC, you know, Alberta Adolescent Recovery Center, and someone started to see, I felt seen and I felt heard and it felt safe to start to look at who I was and how I showed up as a parent with these kids. It was a game changer for me. And it's such a simple thing to do. It's such a simple thing to do, but something that I didn't know how to do as a parent either. You know, my kids would come home and say that they were upset or sad, and I would go into problem solving mode and I would say, yeah, but, or what about, instead of saying things like, wow, that sounds really hard. You sound very lonely. You know, it sounds like you're really struggling. You know, and when I learned how to do that with my kids, and then by extension, everyone in other relationships that I have, man, it strengthens the relationship.
Oh, it's a ripple effect of positive gain, right?
Absolutely. It's very de-escalating for someone who's becoming escalated and feeling very emotionally unregulated.
Yeah.
And it's not meant to be trickery by any means. It's very genuine. It's very authentic.
Of course.
It's, you know, and it's, so validation skills, I would say, were a big turnaround for me in my own recovery and then in my relationship with my kids.
Excellent. All right. So what is a cause or an organization that has been impactful to you on your journey that you would like to give a shout out to?
I would say 2 of them for sure. Alberta Adolescent Recovery Center, or ARC, which is located here in Calgary.
Okay.
And the second one would be a group of psychologists here in town called Inner Solutions. And they are a remarkable group led by Donna Hughes, who specialize in dialectic behavioral therapy. In fact, they may be the only organization in Canada that is certified to offer dialectic behavioral therapy the way it was meant to be offered. So, you know, they were huge in helping me and my family. recover as well.
Amazing. That is amazing. So shout out to ARC and Inner Solutions. Absolutely. Wonderful. All right. So tell us, Maureen, how can people connect with you if they would like to?
You can find me. I have a website.
Okay.
So you can find me on the internet. You can also find me on social media on LinkedIn and Instagram.
Okay.
I'm not as active on social media as I'd like to be, but you can also always find me on my website.
Awesome. Well, we have grabbed all of that information from you. It's now available on the show notes page. So if people want to get in touch with you, that would also be a really quick and easy way to do that.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So, Miss Maureen, guess what?
What?
You've just dared yourself to share. Congrats.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, Salima. It's been a pleasure chatting.
It's been such a pleasure, Maureen. I would just like to take a moment to express my gratitude for the story that you've shared today, your journey through effective parenting, all the pivots that you had to make, what your world was like while you grappled to understand each of your children's mental health and addiction needs, and learning to shift your execution style from case manager to a mom. I am truly grateful to have been able to hear and witness your story today. So thank you for the deep conversation and for all the daring and sharing.
Thanks, Salima. Thanks for the conversation.
Once again, Maureen, thank you for being part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma. To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.